Welcome to the Shared Practices podcast. This is the first episode of our first mini season on the podcast. And let me kind of quickly describe this mini season and why we're doing it. When Richard started it and he had his vision of the 8 seasons. I don't think we really truly anticipated how long it would take us to get through each of the seasons. And so, for example, season two, the acquisitions and systems that we're doing right now, that one started in January, probably won't finish until maybe even next January, at least November, December. So for us to, when we have an opportunity to discuss some really great content that doesn't quite fit in with our framework, we kind of struggled with how do we squeeze it into the content that we're producing now without, sacrificing our purpose and our path to ownership. And so we kind of developed this mini season idea where we would have additional uploads, not on our usual Fridays, that would kind of aid that process of allowing us to talk about things we're interested in that might not fit in with the framework at the time. And so I guess this is kind of a great way for me to introduce Justin Short. You've already listened to him last Friday. If you did listen to the interview with Richard, and we thought we'd do this mini season and we'd upload on Tuesdays. That way it's an additional thing and it's not detracting from our path to ownership, but at the same time, we are producing some really great content. And so Richard and I, we were going back and listening to Justin's interview with Richard, and we felt like there were so many topics in that interview that just required more time. It would be a question, like a really loaded question. We only got 50 minutes to talk about everything. So that's where we really felt like it would be good if we could kind of get multiple episodes with Justin and talk about things in depth and really provide a lot of value for you guys who might be a little bit closer to practice ownership than somebody else and need some more relevant content now. And so I think that's why we decided to do this mini season, because we could really get across a lot of points over the course of 10 or so episodes, as opposed to trying to get a lot of good quality content in 1 hour. And so before I introduce Justin, I just want to say Justin is the consultant that I have selected. I felt like his philosophy really aligned with what I want for myself as a dentist. And, we'll talk about that more as we go through. I explained it in the intro of last episode. And so I really think that he's a great guy to listen to. And I'm really looking forward to this for both myself and for you guys, because it'll be a great learning experience for both of us. Without any further ado, I think that's the longest I've ever talked without introducing my guest. Here's Justin Short.
Hi, George. Thanks for having me. I'm honored.
No problem, Justin. And for our listeners who may not have caught the last episode, why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself, a little bit about your background?
Sure. Well, I'm a dentist by trade still, as of today. And, how far do you want me to go back? You just want me to kind of tell you where I'm at now, or?
Yeah, just talk about your practices, kind of a brief intro for your practices, your philosophy, and what you're doing in the future.
Sure. So, I graduated 2005, and I started off working as an associate, like most dentists do, and just found out pretty quickly after that. I thought it was going to be a match made in heaven. I was pumped. I was really excited to get my career going, and about a couple months into that, I realized it wasn't going to be a match made in heaven. Not blaming it on the doctor I worked for, not blaming it on myself. It just wasn't the best fit. And, so we ended that associateship. And so I had to find a job. I had a new house. I had a new wife. But as some of the dentists listening, if you haven't ran into it yet, hopefully you don't too much in the future. But I had a nice little thing called a non-compete, where I couldn't work within 10 miles of that office, which was in my hometown, for a year or two. I forget how long it was. Not sure how much weight it would have held looking back, but I know his pockets were much deeper than mine at the time. So, not wanting to lock myself into another associateship, and then possibly be 10 to 20 miles outside of where I really wanted to end up being, I ended up taking a job an hour and a half away. So I drove there, hour and a half each way, 3 days a week, and some weeks 4. And after doing that for probably about 6 months, I found a practice I was going to purchase right outside my non-compete. Um, when I purchased, it was doing about 600,000 on 4.5 days a week. So pretty average for the time. And got in there, and within the first couple of years, I hired a coach, and we ended up taking that practice over the next few years from 600 on 4.5 days a week to well over 1 million on 3 days. And we did it without increasing our team size. I only had 3 team members and only had 3 ops. So from that point, after a few years, I started getting antsy, as I do sometimes, and I purchased another practice, which was about 40 minutes away. Um, my first practice I purchased was kind of in a rural community, probably about 45 minutes outside of St. Louis. And the second practice I purchased was much closer to the heart of St. Louis. It was in a much more affluent area, completely different demographics, and much more PPO driven. And my kind of goal at that point was I was going to throw some associates in there, not even think about it, and I was just going to print money. And it just didn't work out like that. I've learned a lot, in the last 8 to 10 years from when that was. So that practice started going downhill a bit. So I started working both practices and went from 3 days a week to a solid long 5 days a week. And I'm just not built for that, mentally at least. And I ended up selling my first practice. We had built considerable equity in, and just kind of went into that second practice saying, hey, if it's going to go down, it's going to go down with me at the helm. And when I took over that second practice, which is where I'm at still today, it did 425,000 on 4 days a week, and that was 2010. And I jumped in there. We dropped a day a week. I took 4 or 5 weeks off that first year, and we jumped to over 700,000. I had a lot of, I guess, crowd control issues at that moment with patients, with the team, but just kind of worked our way back. That was 2011, and today, when I started, we had 3 team members. Now we have 5. Went from 3 ops to 5 ops, and now we do. This year we'll probably do almost 1.7 on our collectible fees. That is our PPO fees. We're still fairly PPO driven. So that's not our UCR fees. I don't like to have the UCR fees in the computer. And we'll do that. And I'll probably I still only work 3 days a week, and I'll probably take a good 10 to 12 weeks off this year. And we're just a touch below 50% overhead. So that's where we're at today. And I also do some real estate investing, and I do coaching now, which has kind of become my passion over the past year or so, a little bit over a year. So that's where I'm at in a long nutshell.
Well, that was fantastic. And for our listeners who, if they haven't caught the theme yet, Justin doesn't like working more than 3 days a week.
No.
And that's kind of the concept. So why don't you go ahead and introduce that 3 days a week lifestyle practice concept that you like to work by and live by?
Sure. So it's kind of, there's a lot of things that go into it. And I never really liked the philosophy of, bust your butt hard for 30, 40 years. And then hopefully by, as you approach 60 or above, then you can finally take some time off and, do some of the things you really want to do with your life. To me, that was just way too long to wait. I didn't want to start to really have the lifestyle I wanted when I was in my golden years, even though we know that 60 is the new 40. So I first, when I began, I just decided really what I wanted my life to look like. Then I worked backwards to design the practice around the life that I wanted, not the other way around. And that's kind of where the lifestyle practice name came from. It kind of incorporates taking extended time off, but still enjoying your financial freedom. I don't think it has to be one or the others. One or the other. I think I talk to a lot of dentists that they feel like they can either take more time off or they can have a really great income. And I try to really focus on both of those and let them know like you can have both. So I had a vision set and it was crystal clear in my mind. And to me, and feel free to jump in if I start rambling, but I'll kind of give you a little bit more of what I feel goes into it.
No, this is great.
So to me, in my kind of core, I feel success is rarely, just a matter of ability. I think has more to do with someone's motivation. If the proper amount of motivation's there, I think the ability will follow. And I also think, or I know, to me, you have to have a vision and you have to have goals that are so worthwhile that the work it takes to achieve them becomes irrelevant. You have to crave those results so much. Like if you go into it saying, man, if I bust my butt for 5 years and if I do the right things along the way, I may make an extra 50 grand a year, or I may get another week of vacation. To me, there's no incentive there. That doesn't get me out of bed. That doesn't fire me up. That doesn't excite me. And unfortunately, I think that's where most of the world's working population's at. And as dentists, I think we're blessed with a profession where the rewards can be exponential. If I can have a practice that makes me $1 million on 3 days a week and 10 weeks off, now I'm starting to get excited. If that's possible, I don't really care what kind of work I have to do for a few years to get there because the payoff is so worth it. So,
Absolutely. And so you've almost created this, and I'm recommending, or I'm guessing that your clients, they do the same thing where they kind of paint their perfect picture and then you reverse engineer the practice systems and whatever it needs to happen to allow them to have that.
Yep. 100%. We always begin with the end in mind. I want to know, I'm going to push them to find out what they really want their life to look like, what kind of, money do they want to be making? What do they want to be doing with their family? How much time do they want off? What do they want to drive? Where do they want to live? Like, I want them to get so darn crystal clear in their mind that we know exactly where we're heading. Because when you know where you're heading, you can take the proper steps to get there.
And so then how do you feel about those things like, they tell you to work extended hours or Saturdays or, to grow the practice, that's almost become kind of just a commonplace advice is you have to do evenings. And, what if I don't want to do those things or, that doesn't fit in with my crystal clear picture of what I want? How do you approach that?
Pretty simply, I would say, then don't do it. I mean, if you like working extended hours, and let me kind of slow it down a bit. Like first off, if you don't like working extended hours, it's definitely not going to be part of the long-term vision. That being said, I'm all for doing whatever you have to do along the way to get to that end vision. When I started out, I knew I wanted patients that loved me. I wanted to take really good care of them. I wanted to make a really good income, and I wanted to accomplish it all in the least amount of time at the office. Because I knew if I could accomplish that, I could spend more time doing the things I love with the people I love. And of course, I had a lot of naysayers along the way saying, you can't design a practice that way. You have to be in the office more than that. Oh my God, what if someone calls you and you're not there? To hit the kind of numbers you want to do, you're going to have such a huge team. Your overhead's going to be sky high. And I was like, nope, I'm still going to do it. And I was actually meeting with a good friend of mine. It's probably been a few years, but we kind of get together and we kind of discuss our plans for the year, our goals for the year to kind of keep each other accountable. And he asked me mine, and I said, this year I want to take an additional 4 weeks off, and I was already taking a good amount of time off, and I wanted to increase my net income by over 150,000. And he looked at me and he actually repeated what I said, like I had misspoke. And I was like, you heard me correctly. That's my plan, and it happened. But I think we allow ourselves and others and society to limit our ideas of what we think is possible, and I think it's often to our detriment. So, as a whole, I know because I've done it that you don't have, in order to have a very successful practice, you don't have to have a practice that, where you have extended hours if you don't like working extended hours. You don't have to work Saturdays if you don't like working Saturdays. If you like that stuff, more power to you. Do it. But if that doesn't fit what you really want your life to look like, then I'd say, don't make it a part of your long-term vision.
Yeah, I think that's just so refreshing, and it really resonates with me personally. And something else I wanted to talk to you about was kind of this decision you talked about hiring a coach, and I've kind of decided to do it also.
Right?
But it's something that I get asked a lot. How are you going to get a coach? Who, why, and so can you kind of talk about just from an objective view? Assuming you were never a coach,
Right.
would you talk about that decision and that process?
Sure. And, I'd say for definitely the majority of my career, I was not a coach, but I was still very pro coach. Um, I have friends from dental school and things that, would see the growth that I had in my practice and just see how, um, definitely not thinking I'm better than them, but they saw a difference between my life and their life, and we were both in the same profession. Um, and I would always tell them, find a good coach, find someone to keep you accountable that can help you, find someone who has done what you want to do, who's accomplished what you want to accomplish, um, and figure out what they do and then do the same thing. I mean, I think that's the simplest way to do something. You may have to pay them, but to me, that money's more than worth it. But going back to kind of my process, I was, I'm kind of a self-improvement junkie. And I had learned, even young in my practice, even probably starting out in dental school, like I knew the best players in any profession, sports, whatever, have a coach. You know, I was just recently read the book Relentless, written by Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant's, and Dwayne Wade's coach. Like if those kind of dudes need a coach and they're the best, like I'm not the best at dentistry. I needed a coach. Um, and I think if you ask any high level players in our profession or any others, they're all going to tell you the same thing, that a good coach is going to increase your success. And I think that your level of success rarely exceeds your level of self improvement. Yeah, you may be able to save a few bucks on the front end, but what's that really costing you in the long run? My answer would be way more than you would invest in a coach. In my experience, uh, I just like some of my least successful clients are the ones who come to me saying, I've had 2 to 3 other coaches and just really not much has changed, and I think when you get to practice, and I'm sure that other dentists that are in practice, sometimes we'll get those patients. Like I have a patient like, man, I've been to 3 or 4 dentists and they just can't get my smile right, or they just can't get this tooth right. And, I start to think in my back of my head, like, bro, it's not the coaching that isn't working. It's you that's not putting in the work. The same thing with the patients. When I signed up for a coach, I couldn't afford 11 years ago. I was scared. I was nervous. I think it was like $50,000 for the year. I didn't have $50,000. I often tell people the story. Just I purchased my practice in the spring. That Halloween before, right after I graduated and everything, that Halloween before, my wife and I went to the pumpkin patch literally just to window shop. We couldn't even afford a pumpkin at the time, but we always look back at that story to kind of keep us in check. But, I didn't have the money. I was scared just like any other dentist is at that point. You're starting out. But what pushed me and scared me even more than losing $50,000 was waiting to learn how to build a really successful practice and life until later, much later on in life. And then finally bucking up and doing it and succeeding at it and then looking back on all that wasted time and wondering how different my life could have been if I hadn't waited. And I'm thankful every day I didn't wait. So that's kind of my feelings on it.
And then, if you don't mind, Justin, I'm going to kind of step in and talk about mine because, it is part of my process, and I do share openly with my listeners. And so, for me, I didn't doubt that I could be successful without help or, without somebody there, but I just felt I could be more successful faster when I had somebody to hold me accountable and to help me see the bigger picture who's not in the practice. When you're kind of in the weeds, it's harder to, and that's kind of something that Dr. Derek Williams was talking to me about, was it's harder to really understand the small things. You get caught up in the small things and you don't think of the bigger picture. And so for me, I felt like I needed somebody to help me see the bigger picture. But then there's a component to why I selected Justin that I think I should also talk about, is because a few things. One, the level of production, hourly production he achieved is not common, but it's something that I had, independently of talking to Justin or anybody, had wanted for myself because of my desire to not be at the office for an extended period of time. I'm a little bit of an antsy guy, and I felt like I wouldn't be happy just being a regular dentist, and I needed to maybe do my dentistry quicker and more efficiently, and then have more time to do other things, as opposed to, I guess, maybe your typical client who would want to be more, relaxing in that off time. I think I just want to be doing something else, whatever that may be. And so I think for those reasons, I really felt that it was a good fit. And the fact that, you're adaptable to what I want versus what you did or what your philosophy is, was also important to me. So I think those were the reasons why I decided to do it. And it's a personal decision, but I felt like I really needed somebody to hold me in check and also hold me accountable for the amount of time I spend on things. I have a tendency to, get overworked a little bit or overwork myself. And so I think to have somebody hold me back in some ways might be good.
Yep. I think one thing that you kind of briefly touched on when you were starting out there is that the clients I work with, or the clients that come to me, are not, they're not usually the ones that are like, oh my gosh, my practice sucks. My practice is horrible. I'm barely making payroll. Sometimes they are, but just like you, it's the ones that, and just like myself, or Derek or whoever, I think it's the ones that already had that motivation. Like, hey, I'm doing okay. I would probably do okay on my own, but I'm not looking to just do okay. I'm looking to go above and beyond all that.
Exactly. And, I've taken your online course, and you talk about something on like narrowing your focus and cutting out all of the, extra stuff. So can you go ahead and talk about that concept a bit?
Sure. Um, I learned early on, in doing my own, self-improvement, reading, doing my thing, and in practice, that big success comes when you do a few key things very well, instead of dabbling in this, wasting time and money on that, and then in the end, accomplishing nothing. Extraordinary results are, to me, directly related to how narrow you can make your focus. They're not an unlimited amount of things of equal importance. There are always a few things that are most important. And I know, and I've seen, and I've learned that high achievers work from a very clear sense of priority. The difference between being very successful or not is being able to distinguish those things and resist the draw to spend time on things that aren't going to have the biggest impact on your success. I talk to doctors all the time. Doctors, people, they like to schedule meetings. They like to schedule meetings to discuss what to discuss at the meetings. They like to tiptoe around everything that is really going to move the needle, because a lot of times the things that really are going to move the needle don't necessarily, they're not necessarily hard, but they can definitely take some work. And sometimes they're the things that are less fun to work on. So doctors, they'll avoid them most all their career, keeping themselves a little bit more comfortable. But in the end, not really, getting the results. And and not really taking action. Because at the end of the day, action is the only thing that counts. I'll give you an example. Um, I have a survey on my website where doctors who are interested in working together can send me some general info, and I can provide a little feedback and maybe see if we're a good fit, see if I can help or not. And in this survey, they can kind of tell me about new patient flow, how long they've been in practice, how good they feel their team is, production, et cetera, et cetera. Then towards the end, I have a question basically asking what is their biggest obstacle to hitting their goals. And every week, without fail, I'll have a doctor, that'll go through the survey and, will say that their team doesn't listen to them. Their production is low. They're not getting any new patients. And then when they list their biggest obstacle, they'll say that it's because they don't place implants or something totally unrelated, in my mind and from my experience of what's really going to create success for them. And I'm like, what? That's obviously not the most valuable pressing issue holding your practice back. But that's what I find is the case with most dentists. It's easy to go take a class on implants. I can get on a plane, go sit in a class for a weekend, and it doesn't really push me out of my comfort zone, but yet in the back of my mind, I feel like I'm doing something. But it can be hard to be a strong leader for your team. It's hard to sit down with a team member and say, you know what, we really need to improve in this area. I think, you're very important to our team. I'm glad that you work in our office. I think you're great, but we need to work on this or we need to work on that. Those are awkward conversations. To me, much harder than going and sitting in a class in my own little bubble. It's hard to be honest with patients and tell them what they really, that they really need a lot of dentistry and to be able to convert on that. It's hard to work on yourself. So, in still wanting to do something or just anything, they go for the path of least resistance. And that has no real long-term effect on their life or career or bottom line. And in working with clients, I help them decide what those most important factors are for them, and we focus hard on them. I help them block out and properly prioritize the things that really matter, that are really going to move the needle and push them towards that end vision that they've set for their life. And you're right, I have zero agenda. I don't expect every client of mine to want a life or a practice that looks like Justin Shorts. I think that would be really boring. But I think that even if we don't have a practice that looks exactly the same or life that looks exactly the same, that a lot of the principles apply across the board. So
Certainly. And you go back to that survey. When you're looking at that survey, who is the ideal client for the lifestyle practice?
Sure. An ideal client of mine is someone who first is motivated, who is willing to be challenged and willing to make improvements on themselves and their practice in order to achieve the lofty vision they have for their life. Although there's no certain age or criteria, I would always suggest the sooner you start, the longer you're going to reap the rewards. Kind of going back to my biggest fear that I mentioned earlier. I didn't want to wait till I was, 35 or 40, even though I have clients that are that age. I think a lot of times they realize as well, like, man, if I would have kind of got on this path 5-10 years ago, who knows where I could have been today. But I think the number one thing is I want someone that's motivated. I don't want a whiner or victim, that is going to push the blame. I want someone that's willing, even if they're not there today, are willing to say, you know what, the buck stops with me. I'm in charge of my life. I'm in charge of my practice, and I want to grow it, and I'm willing to do what it takes to get there because I'm gonna push you. I'm gonna hold you accountable because I have zero interest in failure or not achieving the goals that we set. I don't. Thankfully, I'm blessed that I don't have to take on every client. It's even if when I sell my practice here, possibly soon, I'm not in a position where I have to take every client. If I don't want to work with someone, or I feel like, hey, you may not be the right fit, or um, if I just don't think their mindset is right to begin the process, I don't have to do it. I'm glad I don't. Um, so, but motivation, I'd say, is the number one.
And then we talk so much about average, we talk about better than average. Your lifestyle is better than the average dentist.
Right.
Let's paint a picture of what is average so our listeners can kind of have a good idea of where we're coming from.
Sure. I think, just kind of going by statistics, I've read not too long ago that 96% of dentists can't afford to retire at age 65, unless they're really willing to scrimp. And that's not me. I don't want, at the end of the day, I don't want to retire, whether I do it at age 38 or 65 or what. I don't want to have to do it and then, totally change my lifestyle. I don't want to have to save my way to growth. I want to grow. I want to make the right choices along the way, so I don't have to do that. Average dentist works 4.5 to 5 days a week. They make around $150,000 net a year. And for me, that wasn't my goal. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. There's some dentists that are making that, doing that, or loving life. More power to them. That just wasn't for me. I wanted more, and I didn't want to wait until I was in my golden years to get it. So, Tony Dungy has a quote that I love. Success is uncommon, therefore not to be enjoyed by the common man. You have to decide you don't want the results everyone else gets. If you do what everyone else does, you're going to get the same results everyone else gets.
I love that. That's awesome.
It was, I don't want to take credit. I mean, Tony Dungy said it, but Bruce Baird of the Productive Dentist Academy introduced that quote to me, and it's stuck with me ever since. But, you got to think, do you just want to do your job and be like everyone else? Do you want to work the same amount, make the same amount? Do you not see the value in coaching or the value in working with someone who's already been there and done that and succeeded at it? Then I would say coaching is probably not for you, or at least working with me is probably not for you. And I don't mean it offensively, but with that mindset, I'd rather you just save your money. I want to work with people who want to go above the average in dentistry, not, shooting bullets at that average, but I don't want that for my life. And I want to work with doctors who don't want that for their lives either. So
I think that's a perfect note to end on as we finish our first episode of the mini-series, which is really painting the picture for what's to come and the content that we're going to hit pretty hard. I appreciate you willing to do this, Justin, and we'll see you guys next Tuesday.
Thanks.